A or B?
We really want good decisions to come out of sitting in a little bit of complexity.
Left or right?
Problems arose about 8,000 years ago. Some fool decided to live in a village.
Yes or no?
For fast decision making, 5 is an excellent number.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, and thank you for joining me on The Art of Deciding. Now, about that title, when we were deciding what to call the podcast, we went with art, the art of deciding. It had a slightly edgier ring to it. But what about science? What does science have to do with the choices we make in our lives?
The key to all this is really that humans are one of the primate, the monkey and ape family. And the distinguishing feature of the monkey and ape family is their intense form of sociality. They really have very deep and meaningful relationships with each other. And that's what creates their groups, gives their groups stability through time.
Robin Dunbar is Professor of Evolutionary Psychology at the University of Oxford. He spends his time looking at how humans build communities. If his name sounds familiar, you might have heard of Dunbar's number, which is the limit to the number of meaningful relationships you can hold at any one time. Keep listening and I'll tell you later what the number is. So, according to Robin, we're programmed to live together with others, but it's not always plain sailing.
The thing is about these very intensely social groups that we live in is everybody's got their own idea of what they should do or their own preference. It's extremely difficult to manage. If you look back at traditional small-scale ethnographic societies like hunter-gatherers all around the world, most of this is solved by dispersing the community out across the plains or the forest or whatever it may be that you happen to live in. Problems really arose sort of about 8,000 years ago. Some fool decided to live in a village instead of in these nice dispersed hunter-gatherer social systems. And I sometimes describe it as the biggest problem we had to achieve here was not agriculture, making enough food by growing it. The real problem was how to get everybody to still sit down around the lunch table and speak civilly to each other. So they bring into play lots of different social institutions that allow them to manage these frictions and keep everybody on the same page. The reason 20 million people can live in Mumbai, or indeed a nation state can exist on the scale it does, is because we've exploited these kind of mechanisms, which have a lot to do with the kinds of processes involved in village life. It's having the same view of the world out there, as it were, and how it works, and the view of what your village does and who you are and where you came from. There's a story there which links us all together.
So, there are frictions between humans, but over time we've developed ways of managing them. And it seems these methods worked pretty well, given we're all still here 8,000 years later. So might some of this stuff be useful now?
What struck both of us was what we had known sort of intuitively, I think, was actually really rigorously scientifically explored by Robin and his team. And we kind of had the joyful opportunity of connecting these ideas together, the science and the practice.
Sam Rockey and her business partner, Tracy Camilleri, run Thompson Harrison, a consultancy that helps businesses make big strategic decisions. They thought that Robin's work would be extremely useful. In fact, the three of them got together to write The Social Brain, The Psychology of Successful Groups. The book takes those theories and looks at how organizations can use them to become more successful. Sam has spent her career advising some of the world's biggest multinationals, including brewing group SAB Miller. In the 1990s and 2000s, the company decided to embark on an aggressive global expansion program. That meant creating functional businesses across nearly 80 different geographies. How was this kind of social brain knowledge useful in making that happen effectively?
If you take the SAB Miller example, no matter where you were in the world, we always had a central meeting place. We had a third space. So you had your sort of home space, you had your workspace, but of course we also had the pub, it being a brewing company. And I'm really quick to say as well, it wasn't that people were expected to drink. What it was about, though, is that at a certain time in a day, you were able to go down to the kind of central point, the village square, if you will, and connect with other people. You were able to have the cross-functional conversation. And I genuinely believe that that was such a contributor to the success of SAB Miller. I've yet to come across it in any other organization, that sort of real sense of connection and togetherness. You know, we talk about a lot in our book, the kind of evolutionary need for things like connection, belonging, to have a sense of learning. I mean, I think we've really experience those components of what makes us really thrive as humans. And we've put this in a model called the Thrive model, unsurprisingly, which takes all of the evolutionary psychology components and says, if you follow this formula, if you will, actually what you develop is a thriving organization.
This probably needs pictures, but in small words, what does the Thrive model therefore encapsulate?
Well, it definitely captures this idea of collective purpose. There needs to be a kind of collective ambition for the future. So people need to have a sense of excitement about something that binds them. I think belonging is absolutely critical. I mean, we have sort of a mental health challenge at the moment. People feel a lack of social cohesion. So a sense of belonging is incredibly important for one's well-being. We've got learning. Learning is key. It needs to be slightly stretchy, a little bit stress-inducing. It can't be easy. Values, what are the shared values? I think SAB Miller was brilliant at having a real sense of the shared value of the organization. We've got connection. You know, how do we get people to build trust at speed? Because I think that's at the heart of decision-making. So I think those are the components that are really important. And then the last one is around culture. What are the rituals, artifacts that you need to build a strong culture?
If you look at the way in which different superstars of global business like to run their meetings, Jeff Bezos famously says if you can't feed people out of 2 pizzas, the meeting's too big, it's unmanageable. Elon Musk says if you're in a meeting and you don't believe you should be there, get up and walk out.
Well, he can, can't he? But
well, because yes, he owns the places that he runs,
yeah.
Some better than others. However, there is a science to this process that you can create optimal groups. You can create groups that will function better, but you've got to make a series of decisions to put the right people into the right places at the right time so that the best calls can be made. As a leader, what does one need to decide upon in order to get that group-wide efficiency?
Well, I guess there are 2 major issues or dimensions to this. One is simply a numerical one. It's the size of group.
Oh, I promised you Dunbar's number, the limit to the number of meaningful relationships you can hold at any one time. It's 150.
So it turns out that on natural social groupings, this 150 that defines the sort of extent of our personal social world is actually one of a series of layers. I always describe them as sort of like the ripples on a pond where you throw a stone into a still pond. If you think of yourself as a stone, you're surrounded by a series of ripples running out from you, which get wider and wider and wider, but the wave gets lower and lower and lower. And that's quite a good metaphor for your social world, in which you have a small group of very close and trustworthy friends and family. And then as you go out through a series of layers, they get bigger and bigger, but the quality of the relationship, if you like, declines until you go out through the 150. And then there's some more layers out beyond that. But in terms of kind of working groups, we're really interested in the smaller end of this distribution near yourself. Now, it turns out that these have very specific sizes, these layers. They occur at 5, 15, 50, 150, and those numbers count cumulatively. So everybody in the 50 layer is included in the 150 layer, as it were. Those numbers are extremely robust. They turn up all over the place in many different kind of guises. They are, it seems, optimal points for information flow. There's something almost magical about them, which allows information to flow very efficiently round the network. And then let's say you've got a department of 150 people. What you want them ideally structured in is 3 groups of 50 with somebody acting as the link between them. And that creates very efficient information flow around the system. Now, we've shown that mathematically. It's very well and robustly validated, as it were. The other key to it, though, is who you include within your groups.
Maybe, Sam, you can come in here in terms of the diversity of thought that has to be in the room, yet in a cohesive, purpose-driven, directional sense of it, they have to all be aligned with the objective, but have to be able to speak their minds.
Two of the most exciting things, I think, when we were writing the book was this kind of feedback to what Robin's just described from a numbers point of view, is that actually we interviewed over 50 leaders of different types, whether it was community activists or people who were leading orchestras. But it was quite clear that conversational group size of 4 is an excellent group size. For fast decision making, 5 is an excellent number. There's no facilitation needed. Everybody's voice can be heard in equal measure, pretty much. There's no hierarchy, which I think is really important. So 5 people can get to the point. For a work group to really be effective in terms of diversity of thinking, we talk about a 6 to 12 number being optimum. You need to have the breadth of idea. You need to have a breadth of diversity. What you want is lots of people kind of coming in with lobbing in different thoughts. Each person would have a defined role, but it needs to be managed well. It needs to be kind of well facilitated, having a clear outcome and an agenda. But it's a very good group size in order to come up with something that feels quite powerful. And then of 12 to 15 for complex decision making is what we would advocate. And I don't think it's an accident that juries are sort of 12 people. It's a good number for really coming up with something quite complex. And I know the theme of the conversation today is around decision making. And of course, what we encourage strongly is not to jump to conclusion. We really want good decisions to come out of sitting in a little bit of complexity for slightly longer than feels comfortable. And that, of course, is difficult for organizations. It feels inefficient when we do that, but actually our research shows it's deeply efficient because you get to a much better outcome. So we actually talk about team size to task. It's exactly taking the Dunbar numbers, the Dunbar graph, and mapping that onto what we know organizations do in terms of how they make decisions.
The important thing to remember in this context is that just as group size changes according to tasks, so the diversity makeup also is going to have to change. So if you want a group that works very efficiently, comes to a decision, solves a problem, you want a small group so that they can solve problems quickly. But the key to that is having people who are all on the same page. You know, somebody says X, Y, and Z is the case, and everybody else goes, yep, we know that. Let's go with it. Right. Whereas if you want some planning and blue skies ideas bouncing, then you want a bigger group and go for diversity in that for that very reason. The key in the end is essentially the flow of conversation. One of the problems we have to deal with in everyday life is this very strict limit on the number of people that can be involved in a conversation at 4. And you know, if you have more than 4 people in a conversation, the only way you can keep it together is to make it become a sermon. Right. So one person has the entire floor perpetually and everybody else sits quietly. That's in some sense why we always have to have a chair on any large meeting, because otherwise it will just break up into lots of little conversations. And it will do, you know, I mean, everybody has experience of this. The chair has to rush out to take an urgent phone call and the board meeting descends into chaos. So the problem then is how you manage the herding of the cats, essentially, in these bigger groupings. And, you know, probably 15 is the biggest that you want to have sitting around a table.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you might also enjoy the We Society. From education to the economy, the grand challenges facing our society remain as pressing as ever. Should we switch to a 4-day working week? Is education the key to social mobility? How can we unlock the productivity problem? That's why I'm recommending you give the We Society a listen. It's hosted by journalist and author Will Hutton, and each episode features expert guests sharing their big ideas for changing the way we live. Why not make The We Society your next listen? After this one, of course. Available now on Spotify, Apple, and all good podcast platforms. It's all about trust. And you mentioned earlier, Sam, that ability to build trust so that, and I'm going to quote you, you can make decisions at speed. Because it's all about taking the time to get to the right decision, but at the same time, ensuring that it is done efficiently as possible so that you don't have to come back and redo it tomorrow and redo it the day afterwards.
I mean, something that has astounded me, I think, for decades is this seduction of efficiency in organizations. That if we get straight to the chase, if we focus directly on the agenda at play and we kind of set aside an hour, all will be well. In all our work, we now understand that by putting in things like a meal at the end of a day before you get into the tricky meeting feels somewhat luxurious, but actually we know that the outcome will be so much better. So if we kind of move away from an output orientation, which is let's just get through this thing, to an outcome orientation where we can really see the benefit, I think we would factor in things like much more time to get to know each other, much more time to build connection, a real understanding of who we're with. We work with a fantastic CEO who did strategy in conversation. And it felt somewhat counterintuitive because, of course, CEOs like to stand at the front of a room and sort of say, this is the strategy, now go out and implement it. And of course, it doesn't really work like that. But this CEO decided to actually do it through really meaningful conversations. And guess what? People at the end really understood what was being asked of them and what the strategic focus was. So, I mean, if we really are to be human, we need to understand what rumbles beneath the surface. What makes us human? Why do we lean into things? Why do we enjoy things? What gives us joy and pleasure and hope? And we believe fervently in this being an approach that will allow for thriving organizations. Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's creating affiliative relationships and therefore trust between the individuals. And the problem that people face in moving into a job at a new place, whether they're 21 just having graduated and come to their first job in the big city somewhere, or whether they're coming in, as a specialist of some kind from another part of the world, is all the same. You don't know where to go to meet people socially, period. The only people you know are people at work. And of course, most of them have busy home lives to go to, and the tennis club they've got to be at a meeting for, and got to rush off at 5 o'clock. And so you're kind of left stranded in the middle of nowhere, not knowing where one goes to meet people, or indeed, if you're from another culture, how to meet people. So providing a kind of village atmosphere to the workplace is the one thing that will get you over that hump, because it's the one thing that will encourage people to want to come into work. When they get up in the morning, they can't wait to get there, to essentially to see their friends. The biggest single predictor of your psychological health and well-being and your physical health and well-being is the number of close friends you have. If you don't have any because you're in a strange place, you are going to be off sick constantly. And not only does that mean your workplace is that much less efficient, but your poor old workmates are bearing on their shoulders the added cost of covering for you. So all that would just evaporate, and you'd have not only a happier workforce, but a healthier workforce, but also a more engaged one, I think is the bottom line.
You make the point in the book that humans are hardwired for connection. We are social animals. We want those social groups, and that will get us to work together and collaborate better. Where do we tend to go wrong, Sam, when it comes to making decisions collectively?
I mean, we go wrong in lots of different ways, but I want to begin with a kind of very human going wrong. Robin alluded to kind of getting together and doing things which create connection. I mean, I have been in many situations where the first thing that goes under cost pressure is the canteen, eating together, or stopping the kind of free tea bags at tea time. So there's no yearning for people to meet up. So, I mean, at a very simplistic level, I would say those very human things hinder good decision making. I think at a kind of more sort of meta level, something as simple as how meeting spaces are designed. I mean, the boardroom and whoever kind of came up with the idea of a boardroom table around which people sat with the chair at the top. I mean, already the ability to create decisions which allow everyone to contribute is already minimized. So something about how we think about space. I think in our experience, the best decision makers are those who are able to enter into a conversation with curiosity. It sounds obvious, the ability to listen, and the ability to sit back as if whoever you're listening to has got something so important to say that you get the best thinking from them. And it's only from the best thinking that you can make really wise decisions. And of course, Bruce, as we know, the real disruptive kind of forces come from the edge. If you're not tuning into what those might be, as a senior person, and you're stuck in your kind of echo chamber of 4 or 5 people, because we do believe very senior people are held capture by a very small group of people, and they listen to the voices really of perhaps 3 to 4 people. Our urging would be to go out and kind of talk to those at the edge. I think there is a magic in that. But in order to do that, you yourself have to be able to build trust and connection at speed. And breaking bread, I think, is one of the most effective ways of doing that.
Robin, but that safety of retreating to the ivory tower and having 3 or 4 trusted advisors, your job is strategic. You can't get your hands dirty in the trenches. I mean, other people do that because you've risen to this great position. Immediately creates the distance and leads to breakdowns in communication. And once breakdowns in communication happen, you cannot be making effective decisions, surely.
That is the problem. I mean, you end up with a kind of very rigid managerial hierarchy whereby the way things work at the bottom of the hierarchy is the infamous Jobsworth principle. I can't possibly make a decision on this or do that because it's more than my job's worth, because I shall get into deep trouble from higher up the hierarchy. The problem is how to create a sense of trust which allows flexibility at the base of the hierarchy so people can make decisions off their own bat and are supported in making that decision. And if it was a bad decision, rather than being hung out to dry, there's some process of talking through it and trying to learn from it. But having a managerial system right from the top, which trusts the layers below it to provide that kind of information. But conversely, the other adage that I might allude to, famous in business, is if a meeting takes more than an hour, the chair hasn't done their due diligence and proper work. And what does that mean? It means they haven't gone round and talked to people before the meeting and arrived at some consensus. So when you get to the meeting, everybody knows what the answer is already. It's just a matter of formally accepting it. But that requires a lot of time by the folks up the hierarchy, mingling at some level with the folks lower down the hierarchy. And as Sam says, the best place to do that is in the dining room. You have to persuade people not to eat their sandwiches at their desk, but to take a break and go down and mix through people meeting perhaps for the first time, suddenly discovering they've got interests in common, or at least they've got complementary problems in common, which, the other people have solved already, but their solution can be mapped across to yours. It's just a matter of finding ways of how to implement these opportunities in an appropriate way for the kind of local culture, whatever that might be.
I mean, we believe strongly that, organizations need a social strategy for our young people. I mean, what is happening with our young people? They've never been less happy. This is important. This is important for now, because if it's not us with our own expertise from 3 very different perspectives, we're doing a disservice to the next generation, because organizations need to be designed for the future generations, I think. And they have been designed poorly in the past. I think the trap that we're all in at the moment is that we're at the tail end of a kind of industrial revolution sense of what work is. And nobody really has an imagination to think about what the future of work could look like. So we have to separate ourselves, if we can, from how it's always been, and step into something which is a reimagining of the future. And in order to do that, we have to let go of some of the things we absolutely are passionate and we love so much about, how organizations are designed, how they're structured, and I think that is really challenging. We are all creatures of a zeitgeist, but, having a foot in the current paradigm, but equally having a real step forward into a new paradigm is the challenge for us all. So our encouragement is break up with something that you feel very attached to, because it may not be the right thing and it may not be serving you.
The way we live, and of course, make decisions with other human beings is hardwired into our brains. The more we understand about that, the better we get at managing the groups we're part of. There are certain things we need if we're to be happy and effective in these groups. A sense of collective purpose, a feeling of belonging, to be learning, and for that learning to be challenging. We need to build trust at speed and spend more time than feels comfortable discussing our next course of action. What did Sam say? Avoid the seduction of efficiency. And all of this is encoded within us because of the way our society and our brains have evolved. Robin Dunbar and Sam Rockey's Art and Science of Deciding. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding. You'll find us on all the major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. We've spoken to deciders from many spheres, including champion poker player Liv Bourrie. She told us about how the decision-making processes in high-stakes games can be useful in everyday life. Quick update, in December 2024, Liv broke the record for the biggest ever cash prize won by a female poker player. She bagged more than £2 million in her first professional poker tournament in 5 years. So, maybe worth checking out her art of deciding. And for the record, she then decided to donate $500,000 of it to the fight against factory farming. Plus, find out how the Back to the Future, the musical producer Colin Ingram makes the decisions he hopes will lead to his next smash hit. Go and check these arts of deciding, and please give us a rating and leave a review. Even better, share the link far and wide. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Till the next time, goodbye.